The phone rang at 11:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know because I was staring at the clock on my laptop screen, trying to finish a structural analysis report that should have been done hours ago. The blue glow from the monitor was the only light in my cramped home office, casting shadows across stacks of engineering journals and empty coffee cups. "Dean Callix," I answered, not bothering to check the caller ID. "I need $60,000 for surgery." Lyra's voice cut through the silence like a rusty blade. No greeting, no pleasantries. Just the demand, delivered with the same tone she used to order her morning latte. I leaned back in my desk chair, listening to the familiar squeak of worn springs. 3 months since our divorce was finalized, and this was the first time she'd called directly, instead of having her lawyer send threatening letters. "Good evening to you too, Lyra. I'm doing well, thanks for asking." "Cut the sarcasm, Dean. This is serious. I have a medical condition that requires immediate intervention, and my insurance won't cover the full amount. As my former spouse, you have obligations." Former spouse. She made it sound like a job title I'd been fired from, which, come to think of it, wasn't far from the truth. I rubbed my temples, feeling the familiar tension headache building behind my eyes. The same headache I'd carried for the last 2 years of our marriage, watching Lyra transform from the ambitious law student I'd fallen for into someone who treated me like an inconvenient roommate. "What kind of surgery?" I asked, genuinely curious despite my irritation. "That's none of your business. What matters is that I need the money, and according to our divorce agreement, you're responsible for medical emergencies." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I opened my laptop's file manager and navigated to the folder labeled Divorce Documents. 27 pages of legal jargon that had cost me $3,000 in attorney fees to understand. "Lyra, our divorce agreement specifically states that medical liability only applies to conditions existing prior to the dissolution of marriage and only for treatments deemed medically necessary by 2 independent physicians. What you're describing sounds more like an elective procedure." Silence on the other end. I could practically hear her brain scrambling for a comeback. "It's not elective," she finally said, her voice taking on that sharp edge I remembered from our last few fights. "This is a legitimate medical need, and if you don't help me, I'll have to explore other legal options." Other legal options. Translation. She'd found some obscure clause her lawyer friend thought might work, or she was bluffing entirely. Given that Lyra had graduated in the bottom third of her law school class and currently worked as a junior associate at a mid-tier firm, I was betting on the latter. "Tell you what," I said, clicking through the divorce decree until I found the medical provisions section. "Send me the procedure code, the surgeon's name, and a copy of the estimate. I'll review it with my attorney and get back to you." "I don't have time for your games, Dean. I need an answer tonight." "Then you should have called your emergency contact instead of me." The line went quiet again. This time the silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally she spoke, and her voice was different. Smaller somehow. "What emergency contact?" "The one you listed on all your medical forms last year. You know, when you started having those mysterious appointments every Thursday afternoon?" I kept my tone casual, conversational even. "I'm sure whoever that is would be more than happy to help with your sudden medical emergency." I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Bingo. I'll send you the information," she said quickly. "But I need your answer by tomorrow morning." "Looking forward to it." She hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down and stared at my reflection in the dark window. 41 years old, thinning hair, and crow's feet that had appeared sometime during the last year of my marriage. I looked tired. Hell, I felt tired. But for the first time in months, I also felt something else, a spark of anticipation, like the moment before lightning strikes. My phone buzzed with a text message, a photo of a medical estimate from Riverside Surgical Center. The procedure was listed as Aesthetic Enhancement Consultation and Treatment with Dr. Tristan Kellan, MD. The total cost, $59,847. I saved the image and started typing my response. Received. Will review and respond within 24 hours as required by our agreement. Have a pleasant evening. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched for Dr. Tristan Kellan. The first result was his practice website, Kellan Cosmetic Surgery, Enhancing Your Natural Beauty. The second was his personal LinkedIn profile, complete with a photo of a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement. Square jaw, perfect teeth, and the kind of tan that only came from expensive vacations. The third result made me smile. Dr. Tristan Kellan and Associates, now accepting new patients, financing available for qualified candidates. I clicked through to his practice's patient portal and found exactly what I was looking for. Under Patient Resources was a link to their financial responsibility policies. I downloaded the PDF and started reading. 20 minutes later, I had everything I needed. I opened my email and started a new message. The recipient field got 3 addresses: Lyra's personal email, the billing department at Riverside Surgical Center, and the patient accounts manager listed on Dr. Kellan's website. The subject line read, Medical Financial Responsibility, Lyra Callix. I attached the relevant pages from our divorce decree, highlighting the medical liability clause that clearly stated my obligations ended with the dissolution of our marriage. Then I attached the estimate she'd sent me, along with a formal letter declining financial responsibility for elective cosmetic procedures. But the real masterpiece was the third attachment. Last year, during one of her mysterious Thursday appointments, I'd found a copy of Lyra's patient intake form in her purse. She'd been careless, leaving it folded in her wallet like a receipt. The form was for Dr. Kellan's office, dated 8 months before our divorce was finalized. Under Emergency Contact and Financial Guarantor, she'd written, Tristan Kellan, Personal Relationship. I'd photographed the form that night, thinking it might be useful someday. That day had finally arrived. I attached the photo to my email and typed a brief message. To whom it may concern, please find attached documentation regarding financial responsibility for patient Lyra Callix. As indicated in the attached divorce decree, I am no longer liable for elective medical procedures. Please update your records to reflect the emergency contact and financial guarantor information provided by the patient on her original intake forms. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I read the email 3 times, checking for any hint of emotion or personal commentary. It was professional, factual, and completely devastating. My finger hovered over the send button for exactly 10 seconds. Then I clicked it. I woke up at 6:15 to 17 missed calls from Lyra and 43 text messages. The first few were variations of "call me immediately" and "we need to talk." By message 20, they'd devolved into accusations and threats. By message 30, she was begging. The last message, sent at 4:47 a.m., was just 2 words: "You bastard." I made coffee and read through the entire thread while standing in my kitchen, watching the sunrise paint my neighbor's fence a soft orange. Mrs. Patterson was already in her garden, probably hoping to catch some drama through my kitchen window. She'd been the unofficial neighborhood gossip coordinator since her retirement, and my divorce had provided her with months of entertainment. My phone rang again. Lyra's name flashed on the screen. "Good morning," I answered, taking a sip of coffee. "What did you do?" Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying or screaming, possibly both. "I reviewed the information you sent me and responded accordingly, just like I said I would. You sent my private medical information to the hospital. I sent your own intake form to your own doctor's office. The same form you filled out voluntarily, listing your emergency contact and financial guarantor. I simply suggested they update their records to match your stated preferences." Silence. Then, "They called Tristan." "Did they? How unfortunate. I hope he's able to help you work out the financial arrangements." "Dean, please. You don't understand. This isn't what you think it is." I set my coffee cup down and looked out the window. Mrs. Patterson had abandoned all pretense of gardening and was openly staring at my house now, her pruning shears forgotten in her hands. What I think, Lyra, is that you've been planning this surgery for months. What I think is that you listed your boyfriend as your emergency contact because you expected him to pay for it. What I think is that you called me because he said no, and you figured you could guilt me into covering his expenses. It's not like that. Then explain it to me. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more fragile than I'd heard it in years. Tristan and we're having some difficulties. Financial difficulties. His practice is struggling, and he's dealing with some personal issues from his divorce. I thought maybe, since you were always so responsible with money, you might consider it a loan. I was going to pay you back. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Lyra, do you remember what you said to me the day you moved out? Dean, You said I was holding you back. You said I was small-minded and unambitious. You said you deserved someone who could match your potential. She didn't respond. You said you'd found someone who understood what you needed to be happy. Someone successful. Someone who could give you the life you deserved. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. No, you were honest. Maybe for the first time in months. And you know what? You were right. You do deserve someone who can give you what you need. You found him. So ask him for the money. He doesn't have it right now. Then maybe you should reconsider whether this surgery is really necessary. You don't get to judge my choices. The old Lyra was back. The one who could switch from vulnerable to vicious in the span of a heartbeat. You're absolutely right, I said. I don't get to judge your choices. But I also don't get to pay for them. Not anymore. I hung up before she could respond. My phone immediately started buzzing with another call, but this time it wasn't Lyra. The caller ID showed Riverside Surgical Center. Dean Callix. Mr. Callix, this is Jennifer Martinez from the billing department at Riverside Surgical Center. I'm calling regarding the email you sent last night about Lyra Callix's account. Yes? We've reviewed the documentation you provided, and we need to clarify a few things. According to our records, you were listed as the primary insurance holder and financial guarantor for Ms. Callix's previous appointments with Dr. Kellan. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Previous appointments? Yes, sir. Ms. Callix has been a patient with our practice for approximately 8 months. She's had several consultations and minor procedures, all billed to your insurance. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. How many procedures? I'm not able to discuss specific medical information, but I can tell you that there's currently an outstanding balance of $12,400 on the account. $12,000. For 8 months of appointments I'd known nothing about. Ms. Martinez, I need you to send me a complete billing history for that account. Everything from the first appointment to the most recent. I'm sorry, sir, but I can only release that information to the account holder or their designated representative. According to the divorce decree I sent you, I'm no longer financially responsible for any of Ms. Callix's medical expenses as of 3 months ago. I need those records to verify what I may have been fraudulently charged for. I understand your concern, Mr. Callix. Let me transfer you to our compliance department. Hold music. I drummed my fingers on the kitchen table and watched Mrs. Patterson finally give up her surveillance and head inside. The morning was turning into something much more complicated than I'd anticipated. Mr. Callix, this is Robert Chen from Compliance. I understand you have some concerns about billing irregularities on the Callix account. That's correct. I've just learned that my ex-wife has been receiving services at your facility for months, apparently using my insurance information, without my knowledge or consent. That's a serious allegation, sir. Can you hold while I pull up the account details? More hold music. I used the time to log into my insurance company's website and check my claims history. The results made my stomach turn. 8 months of charges to Dr. Kellan's practice. Consultation fees, procedure fees, anesthesia fees, most of them processed and paid by my insurance, with the remainder billed to me as the policyholder. I'd never seen those bills because Lyra had been collecting the mail during the last year of our marriage. She'd handled all the household paperwork, claiming it was more efficient that way. I'd been grateful to have one less thing to worry about. Mr. Callix, I've reviewed the account, and I think we need to schedule a meeting to discuss this situation in person. There appear to be some significant discrepancies that require immediate attention. What kind of discrepancies? The type that may require us to contact law enforcement. The compliance office at Riverside Surgical Center looked like every other medical administrative space I'd ever seen. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the faint smell of disinfectant mixed with desperation. Robert Chen turned out to be a thin man in his 50s, with the kind of careful demeanor that came from dealing with insurance fraud on a regular basis. Mr. Callix, thank you for coming in. I have to say, this is one of the more complicated situations we've encountered this year. He spread a stack of papers across his desk like he was dealing cards. Insurance forms, billing statements, and what looked like copies of appointment schedules. Let me start with the timeline, he continued. The first appointment was scheduled 11 months ago during your marriage. At that time, Ms. Callix presented valid insurance information and was properly covered under your policy. I nodded. That part made sense, even if I hadn't known about it. However, the issues begin here. He pointed to a form dated 6 months ago. This is a change of financial responsibility form, signed by someone claiming to be you, transferring all future charges to your personal credit card rather than processing them through insurance. I leaned forward to examine the signature. It looked like mine, but something was off about the handwriting. The loops were too perfect, too careful. I never signed this. That's what we suspected. The signature doesn't match the one on file from your insurance card. But here's where it gets interesting. He pulled out another document. 3 months ago, right around the time your divorce was finalized, someone called our office claiming to be you and requested that all billing statements be sent to a different address. What address? A P.O. box registered to Lyra Callix. The picture was becoming clearer, and I didn't like what I was seeing. So she's been forging my signature and intercepting the bills. It appears that way. But wait, there's more. Chen pulled out a thick folder. 2 weeks ago, Ms. Callix came in for a consultation about the procedure she's scheduled for next week. During that appointment, she presented this. He handed me a document that made my hands shake with anger. It was a letter, supposedly from me, authorizing Lyra to schedule any necessary medical procedures and guaranteeing payment for all associated costs. The signature was a perfect forgery. Mr. Chen, I need to be very clear about something. I did not write this letter. I did not authorize any procedures, and I am absolutely not responsible for any charges incurred after my divorce was finalized. We understand that now. The question is, what do you want us to do about it? I thought about Lyra's phone call that morning, her desperate voice begging me to reconsider. I thought about the $12,000 she'd already stolen from me, and the $60,000 she was trying to steal next. I want you to cancel her upcoming procedure immediately. I want you to flag her account for potential fraud, and I want copies of every forged document so I can take them to the police. Chen nodded grimly. I was hoping you'd say that. We take insurance fraud very seriously here, and what Ms. Callix has done constitutes both identity theft and wire fraud. He started gathering the papers into neat stacks. There is one more thing you should know. Dr. Kellan has been personally involved in approving several of these irregular billing arrangements. While that doesn't necessarily indicate wrongdoing on his part, it does suggest that he's been unusually accommodating to Ms. Callix's requests. Accommodating how? Well, for instance, most cosmetic procedures require payment in full before the appointment. In Ms. Callix's case, Dr. Kellan has been allowing her to schedule procedures with just a promise of future payment. That's unusual for our practice. I bet it was unusual. I was starting to understand exactly what kind of arrangement Lyra had with the good doctor. Mr. Chen, I need to ask you something confidential. Is Dr. Kellan married? Chen's expression became carefully neutral. I'm not sure how that's relevant to the billing issues. Humor me. Dr. Kellan recently finalized a divorce. His ex-wife received a substantial settlement, which has put some financial pressure on his practice. Everything was falling into place. Tristan and Lyra, both recently divorced, both dealing with financial problems, both using my money to fund their relationship. I'll need those copies as soon as possible, I said, standing up. Of course, and Mr. Callix, you might want to check your credit report. If Ms. Callix has been forging your signature for medical bills, there's a chance she's been doing it for other things as well. The drive home took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. I kept thinking about all the times Lyra had offered to handle the paperwork, all the times she'd volunteered to check the mail or pay the bills online. I'd thought she was being helpful. Instead, she'd been setting up the perfect system to rob me blind. I pulled into my driveway and noticed Mrs. Patterson lurking by her mailbox again. This time, I decided to give her something worth gossiping about. Afternoon, Mrs. Patterson. Oh, hello, Dean. How are you holding up, dear? I couldn't help but notice you've been getting a lot of phone calls lately. I'm doing very well, actually. Just finished meeting with some fraud investigators about my ex-wife's criminal activities. Should make for an interesting few weeks. Her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Criminal activities? Identity theft, insurance fraud, forgery, the works. But I probably shouldn't say too much while the investigation is ongoing. I headed toward my front door, then turned back as if I'd just remembered something. Oh, and Mrs. Patterson? If anyone comes by asking questions about Lyra or her boyfriend, you might want to be very careful about what you say. The authorities tend to take witness statements quite seriously in fraud cases. I left her standing there with her mouth hanging open and went inside to check my credit report. 3 hours later, I had a complete picture of the damage. In addition to the medical bills, Lyra had opened 2 credit cards in my name, taken out a personal loan, and somehow managed to add herself as an authorized user on my primary bank account. The total theft was just over $37,000. I made copies of everything, organized it into neat folders, and called the non-emergency number for the police department. Detective Morrison speaking. Detective, my name is Dean Callix, and I need to report identity theft and fraud, multiple felonies, substantial dollar amounts, and I have extensive documentation. How substantial are we talking about, Mr. Callix? $37,000 so far, with an attempted additional $60,000. I think you'd better come in. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucracy. Detective Morrison turned out to be a woman in her 40s with the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much human stupidity. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes in a folder that was already thick with similar cases. Mr. Callix, what you're describing is unfortunately more common than you might think. Domestic financial fraud has increased dramatically in the past few years, especially during divorce proceedings. She flipped through the documents I'd brought, pausing occasionally to examine signatures or billing dates. The good news is that you've done an excellent job documenting everything. The bad news is that prosecution can be complicated when the perpetrator is a former spouse. Juries sometimes have sympathy for people they perceive as desperate rather than criminal. What are my options? Well, we'll definitely open an investigation. With this level of documentation, we should be able to get warrants for financial records and possibly make an arrest. But I have to warn you, these cases can take months to resolve, and recovery of stolen funds is never guaranteed. I nodded. I'd expected as much. However, Morrison continued, there might be a faster way to get your money back depending on how cooperative Ms. Callix wants to be. What do you mean? Sometimes when people realize they're facing serious criminal charges, they become very motivated to make restitution. We could approach her attorney and see if she's interested in negotiating a settlement that avoids prosecution. And if she's not interested? Then we arrest her and let the district attorney sort it out. I left the police station with a case number and a promise that Detective Morrison would contact Lyra's attorney within 48 hours. The next part of my plan required a different kind of research. Dr. Tristan Kellan's office was located in the medical district downtown, occupying the top 2 floors of a glass tower that probably cost more per month than I made in a year. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with the kind of aggressive elegance that screamed expensive to anyone within a 50-foot radius. I wasn't there to make an appointment. I was there to gather intelligence. The receptionist was a young woman with the kind of artificial perfection that suggested she was also a client. Her smile was professionally warm and completely empty. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Kellan Cosmetic Surgery. How may I help you?" "I'm here to speak with someone about payment options for my wife's upcoming procedure." "Of course. Let me get someone from our financial services department." She made a quick phone call, and within minutes a middle-aged man in an expensive suit appeared from a back office. "Mr. Johnson," I lied smoothly. "My wife is scheduled for surgery next week, and we're having some concerns about the payment arrangements." "I see. What's your wife's name? I can pull up her account." "Actually, I'd prefer to discuss this in general terms first. I understand Dr. Kellan sometimes makes special arrangements for certain clients." His smile became noticeably less warm. "All of our payment policies are clearly outlined in our patient agreements, Mr. Johnson. We don't make special arrangements that aren't properly documented." "Of course not. I'm just trying to understand how the billing process works when there are multiple parties involved. Insurance, guarantors, that sort of thing." "Perhaps you should speak directly with your wife about the details of her account. Patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing specific arrangements without proper authorization." I could see I wasn't going to get anywhere with the official channels. Time for a different approach. "You know what? You're absolutely right. I'll talk to my wife and have her call you directly. Thanks for your time." I left the office and walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop with a clear view of the medical building's parking garage. Then I settled in to wait. At 5:30, Dr. Tristan Kellan emerged from the elevator and walked toward a silver BMW parked in a reserved space. He looked exactly like his website photos, tall, confident, and expensively groomed. He also looked like a man who'd never had to worry about money in his life. I followed him at a discreet distance as he drove through downtown traffic, eventually pulling into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant called the Metropolitan. I waited 5 minutes, then went inside. The hostess seated me at a table with a clear view of the bar, where Tristan was nursing what looked like an expensive scotch and checking his phone with increasing agitation. He looked like a man waiting for someone who wasn't going to show up. After 20 minutes, he made a phone call. I couldn't hear the conversation, but his body language told the whole story. Frustration, anger, and what might have been desperation. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. This call was shorter and ended with him slamming the phone down on the bar hard enough to make the bartender look over with concern. I paid for my untouched coffee and left before he noticed me. The next morning, I woke up to find Detective Morrison's business card under my front door with a handwritten note. "Call me. Interesting developments." "Detective Morrison? This is Dean Callix. I found your note." "Mr. Callix, we need to talk. Can you come in this morning?" "What's happened?" "Let's just say your ex-wife's attorney called us before we called him. Apparently, Ms. Callix is very interested in avoiding criminal charges." An hour later, I was back in the police station, this time accompanied by my own attorney. James Fletcher was a criminal defense lawyer I'd hired after my first meeting with Morrison, figuring I needed professional representation, even as the victim. "Dean, here's the situation," Fletcher explained as we walked toward the detective's office. Lyra's attorney contacted the DA's office yesterday evening and indicated that his client wants to make full restitution in exchange for avoiding prosecution. That's actually a very good sign for you financially. What's the catch? The catch is that she's claiming the fraud was Dr. Kellan's idea, and that she was coerced into participating because of their relationship. She's offering to cooperate with a larger investigation in exchange for immunity. Detective Morrison was waiting for us with a folder that had grown substantially since my last visit. Gentlemen, we've had some interesting developments in the last 24 hours. It turns out that Ms. Callix isn't Dr. Kellan's only victim. We've identified at least 3 other women who appear to have been involved in similar billing schemes over the past 2 years. She spread out a series of documents that looked depressingly familiar: forged signatures, falsified insurance claims, and fraudulent financial guarantees. The pattern is always the same. Dr. Kellan targets recently divorced women with wealthy ex-husbands, develops personal relationships with them, and then helps them defraud their former spouses to pay for cosmetic procedures. So this was never about Lyra wanting surgery, I said. This was about Kellan finding a way to get paid when his other funding sources dried up. That's our working theory. Dr. Kellan's practice has been struggling financially since his divorce, and he's been using these fraudulent schemes to keep the business afloat. Fletcher leaned forward. What does this mean for my client's restitution? It means that Dr. Kellan has significant assets that can be seized to compensate the victims. Ms. Callix's cooperation could help us recover not just Mr. Callix's money, but potentially much more. How much more? Detective Morrison smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Dr. Kellan's practice, his personal assets, and his malpractice insurance. We're talking about several $1 million in potential recovery. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. What had started as a simple case of divorce fraud had turned into something much larger. Detective, what happens to Lyra in all this? That depends on how cooperative she is and how much evidence she can provide. If she's telling the truth about being coerced, and if she helps us build a case against Dr. Kellan, she might avoid prison time entirely. And if she's lying, then she goes down with him. The meeting took place in a conference room at the district attorney's office, all polished wood and intimidating law books. I arrived early and watched through the window as Lyra's car pulled into the parking lot. She sat in the driver's seat for several minutes before getting out, and even from 3 floors up, I could see the tension in her movements. She wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize walked beside her toward the building's entrance. Tall, expensively dressed, with the kind of confident stride that suggested he was used to being the smartest person in the room. Her attorney, presumably. Detective Morrison entered the conference room carrying a thick folder and a laptop computer. Behind her came my attorney, James Fletcher, and a woman I hadn't met before. Mr. Callix, this is Assistant District Attorney Sarah Williams. She'll be handling the prosecution if this case goes to trial. Williams was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. She looked like someone who didn't lose often. Mr. Callix, I want you to understand that what happens in the next hour could determine whether your ex-wife spends the next 5 years in prison or walks away with community service. Her cooperation is valuable to us, but it's not invaluable. What do you need from me? Just listen. And if she says anything that contradicts what you know to be true, speak up immediately. Lyra entered the room 5 minutes later, followed by her attorney. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing a conservative navy suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. She didn't look at me directly, but I caught her glancing in my direction several times as everyone took their seats around the conference table. Ms. Callix, Ada Williams began, you've indicated through your attorney that you're prepared to provide information about Dr. Kellan's fraudulent billing practices in exchange for consideration regarding the charges against you. Is that correct? Yes. Lyra's voice was barely above a whisper. I need you to speak clearly for the recording device, and I need you to understand that anything you say here can and will be used in court if this case goes to trial. I understand. Good. Let's start with how you met Dr. Kellan. For the next hour, I listened as Lyra told a story that was both exactly what I'd expected and somehow worse than I'd imagined. She'd met Tristan at a legal conference 8 months before our divorce was finalized. He'd been charming, attentive, and sympathetic about her difficult marriage. They'd started having coffee, then lunch, then dinner. He made me feel appreciated, she said, still not looking at me, like I was worth something more than just being someone's wife. The affair had started 3 weeks later. Tristan told me that I deserved to feel beautiful, that I should invest in myself. He offered to perform some minor procedures at no cost, as a way of showing how much he cared about me. But there were costs, Detective Morrison interjected. Not at first. The first few appointments were genuinely free. But then his financial situation changed. His ex-wife's settlement was larger than expected, and his practice was struggling. So he asked you to start paying? He said it was temporary, just until he could get back on his feet. He suggested using Dean's insurance, since we were still married and I was covered. But then you started forging signatures. Lyra's hands trembled as she reached for the glass of water in front of her. Tristan said it was just paperwork. He said all married couples made financial decisions together, and that Dean would probably approve if he understood how important it was to me. Did you believe that? For the first time, Lyra looked directly at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that someone finally understood what I needed. Ada Williams pulled out a document I recognized, the forged authorization letter for the $60,000 procedure. Ms. Callix, whose idea was it to forge this letter? Tristan's. He said his practice was in serious financial trouble and that this procedure would help him avoid bankruptcy. He promised he would pay Dean back eventually. Did you believe that? Lyra's voice broke. No, I knew it was wrong, but I was scared that if I didn't help him, he would end our relationship, and I couldn't face being alone again. The room was quiet for several moments. I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected: pity. Ms. Callix, Williams continued, are you prepared to testify that Dr. Kellan instructed you to forge your ex-husband's signature on multiple documents? Yes. Are you prepared to testify that he provided you with examples of Mr. Callix's signature to copy? Yes. Are you prepared to wear a recording device and attempt to get Dr. Kellan to admit to his role in these fraudulent activities? Lyra's attorney leaned over and whispered something in her ear. She nodded slowly. Yes. Ada Williams closed her folder and looked around the table. Mr. Callix, do you have any questions for Ms. Callix before we conclude this meeting? I'd been dreading this moment. There were so many things I wanted to say, so many questions I wanted answers to, but looking at Lyra across the table, broken and desperate and facing the consequences of her choices, I found that most of my anger had burned away. Just one question, I said finally. Do you actually need this surgery, or was it all just a way to get money for Tristan? Lyra's face crumpled. I don't know anymore. He convinced me that I needed to change, that I wasn't good enough the way I was. But now I think maybe he was just looking for a way to save his practice. Thank you for being honest. William stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Ms. Callix, we'll be in touch within 48 hours to set up the recording session with Dr. Kellan. Until then, you're not to have any contact with him whatsoever. Is that understood? Understood. As everyone filed out of the conference room, Lyra lingered near the door. For a moment I thought she was going to say something to me. Instead, she just looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, then followed her attorney out into the hallway. Detective Morrison approached me as I gathered my things. How are you feeling about all this, Mr. Callix? Honestly, tired and ready for it to be over. It will be soon. Dr. Kellan doesn't know we're on to him yet, so he'll probably incriminate himself pretty thoroughly when Lyra contacts him. These types usually do. What happens after that? Arrests, asset seizure, and hopefully full restitution for you and the other victims. Dr. Kellan's practice alone is worth about $2 million, and his personal assets add another $1 million on top of that. I walked out of the DA's office into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling like I'd just emerged from a cave. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dean, this is Lyra. I know I have no right to ask, but could we talk privately? There are things I need to say that I couldn't say in there." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the coffee shop on 5th Street. 1 hour, and then we're done. Thank you." I drove home slowly, taking the long way through downtown. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The nightmare was almost over, and justice was finally within reach. But first, I had one last conversation to endure. The coffee shop on 5th Street was nearly empty at 2 in the afternoon. Just a few students with laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper by the window. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner, away from potential eavesdroppers. Lyra walked in exactly on time, looking around nervously before spotting me. She'd traded yesterday's conservative suit for jeans and a simple sweater, making her look younger and more vulnerable than she had in the DA's office. She ordered a latte and sat down across from me without making eye contact. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said quietly. "You said you had things to tell me that you couldn't say yesterday. I'm listening." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to warm them, even though the afternoon was mild. "I need you to know that none of this was supposed to happen to you. When it started, I really believed Tristan when he said it was just temporary, just until his practice recovered." "When did you realize it wasn't temporary?" "About 2 months ago. He started talking about bigger procedures, more expensive treatments. He said if I really loved him, I would find a way to help him save his business." "And you chose him over doing the right thing." "I chose him over being alone." She looked up at me for the first time. "Do you know what it's like to be 37 years old and feel like you've wasted your entire life? To look in the mirror and see someone who's never accomplished anything meaningful? Lyra, you're a lawyer. You have a career, a profession that most people respect. How is that not meaningful?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm a junior associate at a third-tier firm, Dean. I handle insurance disputes and property transfers. I'm not changing the world or fighting for justice. I'm just pushing papers and billing hours." "So you decided to commit fraud instead?" "I decided to try to feel important to someone. Tristan made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth investing in. And when he needed help, I thought maybe this was my chance to prove that I could be the kind of partner he deserved." I took a sip of my coffee and studied her face. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. "What happens now?" I asked. "I cooperate with the investigation, testify against Tristan, and hope the DA keeps her word about reduced charges. And after that? I don't know. I'll probably lose my job when this becomes public. I might lose my law license. I'll definitely lose Tristan." She paused. "I've already lost you. You lost me long before any of this started, Lyra. You lost me when you decided I wasn't good enough for the life you wanted." "I know, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it." We sat in silence for several minutes. Around us, the normal sounds of the coffee shop continued, the hiss of the espresso machine, the quiet conversations of other customers, the rustle of newspaper pages. "Dean, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I considered the question carefully. A month ago, the answer would have been an immediate and emphatic no. But sitting across from her now, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes, I found that my anger had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of weary acceptance. I think forgiveness is something you'll have to earn from yourself, I said finally. What you did to me was wrong, but what you did to yourself might be worse. What do you mean? You threw away 8 years of marriage and destroyed your own integrity for a man who was using you to commit crimes. You let him convince you that you weren't good enough as you were, and then you let him turn you into someone worse than you started. Tears started rolling down her cheeks, but she didn't try to wipe them away. The woman I married was ambitious and determined and sometimes difficult, but she wasn't dishonest. She wouldn't have stolen from someone who trusted her. I know. So maybe the question isn't whether I can forgive you. Maybe the question is whether you can figure out how to become someone worth forgiving. She nodded and finally wiped her eyes with a napkin. There's one more thing I need to tell you, she said. Something I didn't mention yesterday. What? Tristan has been recording our conversations for the past month. He's been paranoid about the investigation, and he wanted to make sure he had evidence that I was a willing participant in everything. Why are you telling me this? Because he's planning to disappear. He's been moving money out of his business accounts and into offshore investments. If the DA doesn't arrest him soon, he's going to run. I pulled out my phone and started typing a text message to Detective Morrison. You need to tell the police this immediately. I will, but I wanted you to know first. I finished the text and hit send. Within seconds, my phone rang. Mr. Callix, what's this about Dr. Kellan planning to flee? I looked at Lyra, who nodded. Lyra's here with me. She has information about Kellan that you need to hear right now. Bring her to the station immediately. I hung up and looked at Lyra. Time to go. Dean? Yeah? Whatever happens next, I want you to know that I never stopped caring about you. I just stopped believing that I deserved you. Lyra, you deserved better than what you settled for. We both did. An hour later, I was sitting in Detective Morrison's office while Lyra gave a detailed statement about Tristan's escape plans. Morrison had already contacted the DA's office and requested immediate arrest warrants for both Tristan and his office manager, who apparently had been helping him move money. Mr. Callix, we're going to need Ms. Callix to make that recorded call to Dr. Kellan tonight, instead of waiting until tomorrow. If he's planning to run, we can't risk losing him. What do you need from me? Just stay available by phone. If something goes wrong with the recording operation, we might need you to verify details about the fraudulent charges. I drove home as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of better times. Mrs. Patterson was in her front yard again, but this time she just waved instead of trying to start a conversation. Word had probably gotten around the neighborhood about the police investigation. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Mr. Callix, this is Detective Morrison. We got him. Dr. Kellan? Dr. Kellan, his office manager, and about $2 million in fraudulent billing, Ms. Callix did an excellent job getting him to incriminate himself on the recording. What happens now? Asset seizure, criminal charges, and restitution for all the victims. You should have your money back within 60 days, plus interest and penalties. I hung up and walked out onto my back porch, looking up at the clear night sky. For the first time in months, the future felt like something I could look forward to instead of something I had to endure. My phone buzzed with one final text message from Lyra. It's over. Thank you for giving me the chance to do the right thing, even if it was too late. I hope you find someone who deserves what you have to offer. I deleted the message without responding and went inside to start planning the rest of my life. 6 months later, I received a check from the district attorney's office for $43,000. Full restitution, plus interest and court costs. Dr. Kellan had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy. Lyra received 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service. I deposited the check and used part of it to take a vacation to Colorado, where I spent a week hiking in the mountains and remembering what it felt like to be happy. The rest I invested in a small engineering firm that specialized in renewable energy projects. It seemed like a good way to build something positive out of the wreckage of the past year. Mrs. Patterson still waves when she sees me, but she's found new neighbors to gossip about. I've started dating again, carefully and without expectations, but with hope. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about Lyra and wonder if she ever figured out how to forgive herself. I hope she did.